Okay, let's dive straight into this explainer. We're going to explore a truly fascinating, chilling, and honestly tragic transition from a state of absolute certainty straight into the silent void of the soul. Today we're unpacking a grim, dark, gothic fable from the Mercurial Legendarium. It's all about this concept of epistemological dissolution, which is essentially the complete collapse of human knowledge and meaning. But here's the wild part. This devastating event is actually framed as a necessary evolution of the soul. Our story kicks off with our primary catalyst, a figure known as the Baron. He champions what's called a cosmic creed, and this belief system literally grinds human certainty into dust. He doesn't look at our grand libraries or rich histories as achievements, not at all. He cynically views the entire transmission of human knowledge as just a fragile layer of paint over a fundamental void. As he puts it, it's just a game of ruined telephone played over the graves of ancestors. So, to really grasp why he feels this way, we have to look at the world humanity has actually built for itself.
So that brings us to Act 1, the captivity of the Iron City.
This is our baseline, right here. The Iron City is this massive symbol of mechanized captivity and bureaucratic logic. Think of it as a towering monument to industrial cynicism. Basically, in a desperate attempt to find some kind of order in a terrifying, chaotic universe, humanity just went all in on bureaucracy. And in doing so, they completely suppressed their own divine spark. They literally traded spiritual freedom for a mechanized, entirely predictable captivity. It turns out, humanity's ultimate defense mechanism against the terrifying unknown is just endless paperwork. Which leads perfectly into Act 2, the Archive's static order versus the Baron's nothingness.
This right here is the core tragedy of our Gothic fable. It's this desperate struggle for preservation going up against the absolute force of active negation. On one hand, we have these desperate witnesses, figures like Dr. Hess and the Lorekeeper. They represent the sort of passive nihilism. They fiercely guard the archive, which symbolizes static divine order, and they treat knowledge like these weak little lanterns against the dark. But then, on the opposing side, we have the Baron's active negation. He wants to expose the void. He uses this cold anti-light to utterly crush the automated prison, replacing the static order of the archive with the silent void of the soul.
There's a quote from the Legendarium that perfectly captures the absolute, heartbreaking futility of the Lorekeeper. Trapped behind a rusted iron gate, the Lorekeeper is frantically scribbling names onto scorched scrolls, literally weeping over blank white vellum. They are, quote, drawing shapes in mud beside a river that no longer exists. They're desperately trying to preserve an erased history, simply because they don't have the strength to face that primordial silence where all our language actually comes from.
And that brings us to Act 3, the breath of the Grey Spirit.
Enter the Grey Spirit. Now, this entity is a physical manifestation of the Baron's cosmic creed, but what's absolutely crucial to understand here is exactly how it destroys things. It doesn't violently attack the archive with fire or brute force or anything like that. Instead, it just breathes this grim, pure honesty upon human works.
The collapse that follows is honestly beautifully systematic. First, because all language is really just borrowed from a primordial silence, the Grey Spirit simply returns it to that exact source. Next, the intellectual frameworks that define civilization just crumble. Recorded history is turned into mere rumor. Philosophy becomes nothing more than conjecture. Even poetry is reduced to meaningless noise. Finally, that fragile layer of paint we call human meaning is peeled away entirely, revealing the blank white vellum underneath. All stored truth, it's just gone.
Which moves us into Act 4, the arithmetic of weightlessness.
The text describes this moment incredibly vividly. It says, "The Baron did not touch the canvas. The Grey Spirit did not breathe upon it. They stood in the doorway for what may have been a very long time, and then they walked back into the fog."
And the eerie departure is captured perfectly. It is not recorded whether the Baron understood what had happened, but the Grey Spirit, it is said, looked back once, its glass eyes catching the lamplight from the studio before the fog swallowed it whole.
The philosophy driving this whole event hits really hard. The Baron effectively tells humanity, you weep for a broken toy. Man is an animal so terrified of his own weightlessness that he builds cages of gold and calls them metrics of the soul. Value is a ghost you chase to avoid looking into the abyss beneath your feet.
And then comes the brutal, liberating truth. Now the cage is gone. Stand in the dirt, look at your empty hands, and learn the only true arithmetic. Subtract everything from nothing, and you are finally free. The aftermath is just haunting. The Baron turned and walked back into the fog, the gray spirit gliding silently behind him. Behind them, the villagers sat in the dust, staring at their hands, unable to buy, sell, or believe ever again.
So what happens next? Act 5, the awakened mercurial spirit.
We can actually map out this profound evolution of the soul. It forces humanity out of the mechanized industrial captivity of that first era, straight through the grim darkness and total collapse of all stored truth in the second era. But here's the twist. Discarding this stored truth is exactly what pushes humanity toward true internal sovereignty in the third era. By completely destroying the external lanterns, the individual is forced to look inward, to finally explore their own psychological depths.
And this brings us to the birth of the awakened mercurial spirit, also known as the Master of Deceptions, or the Bard. Unlike the Lorekeeper, the Bard doesn't weep over the blank vellum. Instead, he uses the void as his own personal workshop. This is the self-mastered creator, who has finally claimed his own divine spark in a fundamentally silent universe. He actively chooses the dangerous risks of the unknown over the blind conformity of the herd, daring to forge a key from the cold silence and write brand new meaning onto the blank vellum of existence.
So this explainer leaves us right where those villagers were left at the end of the fable, standing in the dirt with empty hands, completely free of the Iron City's cages. The grand illusion of meaning has been totally stripped away. So the big question we're left with, the ultimate challenge of the awakened mercurial spirit, is this. Now that the sturdy towers have fallen and the vellum is blank, what will you write in the silence of your own soul?